And we are live. What's happening, good people? Thank you again for tuning in. Another Thursday. Pull up and chop with us. Got Walter in the spot. Nick. Dr. Martin Quick. What should I say? Elder Walter. The drummer Nick. And Dr. Quick. And I'm just that guy up in the left-hand corner.
Rocking the UAP Newton.
So we thank you again for tuning in with us as we continue talking about Audre Lorde's Sister Outsider, and we've come to I'm willing to say one of the more delicate chapter essays. I think this was actually a lecture she gave, a speech. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one hit me a little harder than the previous ones. This one hit me. I had to sit with a lot more of her material in this one for a lot of reasons. This one hurt me bad. I mean, I got a couple bruises. I had to grab some Band-Aids and some Neosporin and sit with this one as because she was dealing with some real serious issues. And if I didn't know any better, even though she said lessons from the 60s, I swear it seemed like she wrote this thing right after things popped off with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, minus the pandemic. But everything else was spot on to what we are encountering at this particular moment. Anybody would agree or concur?
Well, I'll say that for you to say that, I think it's an old saying I've heard growing up that people say the more things change, the more things remain the same.
Yeah.
And so, just hearing you say that, that's the first thing that popped in my mind. Like, yeah, she wrote this she's talking about the 60s, but the more things change, the more it just stay the same. Like,
yeah.
But that's even with the W.B. Du Bois that we read. It felt the same similar, like he had just written this, and so yeah, things are pretty much the same, and at least aspects.
Right. And before we go any further, hey, please remember to like, share, and comment as you see fit. But let me read this one passage right here. I thought this was, as a group of sentences, this might have been one of the best groups of sentences or passages in this particular section. And I wanted to kind of start the discussion with this. Well, we all have different texts. So it says, but there is no simple monolithic solution to racism, to sexism, to homophobia. There is only the conscious focusing within each of my days to move against them. Wherever I come up against this particular manifestations of the same disease, by seeing who the we is, we learn to use our energies with greater precision against our enemies rather than against ourselves. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you something. That's it. That first part, and then how she kind of closes it out. That is a magical, and I'm not talking magical as in some mythical presence. I'm talking magical, like if you don't do this, you may die type magical.
I would suggest that you back up one sentence at your starting to where she says the answer to cold is heat. The answer to hunger is food, and then goes in, because that's what Nick is talking about. That's what you're talking about. The more things change, the more they stay the same. it's not so much that, it's just that we think that there is some. So like a lot of folks like to look at the 60s, the 50s and 60s and call that the modern civil rights movement and say that there you go, that's the solution. That's what changed. That's, like cold is the heat to heat, and the hunger is the food. Like we're looking for that one thing just to flip a switch and racism is gone, or and now we're dealing with, like I said, more intently on sexism and homophobia. Like if we could just do this one thing, boom, everything will change. And that's just that's what she's hitting at. It's not that. We've got to learn to day by day do what we can, individually, and then that'll span out collectively. And then Dr. Davis said in a previous book we read that freedom is a constant struggle. This freedom we want for everyone is a constant struggle. It is constantly trying to reimagine who is the we,
Mm-hmm.
and then we can act with that precision that we need to act with. But that we have a problem identifying the we. I think that's one of the big problems.
Yeah, because that's what she talked about, the difference, and I think, like you said, Walter, Dr. Davis talked about the collective struggle, where how you connect with what's happening in Palestine to what happened in Ferguson. I think the more that we see the we, the more that I think it empowers us, because there's something about numbers. When you feel you're coming up against oppression, the numbers or the people that are on your side. I mean, it feels a lot winnable, at least for me, when I have 5 people facing 3 people. I have more people in my fight that understand and can help me in terms of to strategize in ways to win the particular struggle or fight.
Let me ask you a question on that now.
Mm-hmm.
Does Miss Lorde does she really articulate that in that way though? That's because my read doesn't really say it's a matter of numbers as much as a matter of devoted individuals. Not saying that it's wrong, but she appears to say that, hey, we need folk who are serious about the struggle more so than more people in the struggle.
Well, I mean, in terms of the way I'm saying it, I mean, I didn't qualify.
Right, you did. That's true.
I just said,
right. You did.
One of our sayings in our fraternity is members versus men, and we call it 80 versus 80. 8 men thoroughly make a spirit, or far greater access to 80 with lukewarm enthusiasm. So I get that, but again, the more, and I'll be honest, if you're fighting in a war, as a veteran, if our whole company is not committed, but we got to take the hill, some people got to die. So, that'll be washed out in the fight. Who's really committed? You'll see that. You'll see that real early. I mean, when you're in that type of fight, I mean, everybody doesn't. I mean, you figure that out in the struggle. They say everybody wants to get to heaven, but nobody really wants to die.
I'll tell you why I asked that question. Up above that same passage, probably the next paragraph up, when she says unity does not mean what's that word? Unanimity. God, I can't even read today.
No, I can't say unanimity.
Unanimity. That word.
Yeah.
In other words, we're not gonna all be the same.
Right. We know what it means.
We can be united, but we're not gonna be. And that, see, again, that's that she's been talking about this difference.
Right.
And I know these are from different places and speeches and stuff, but this difference keeps coming up in these essays and speeches over and over again. This embracing our differences in a way that still unifies us is where the strength is. Because she goes back and, and she's talking about how the FBI and the CIA are using the various groups, Black Muslims and this, that, and other, against each other. And they're able to infiltrate the movements because people are willing to, are stuck on their differences. And when the we that should have been together is allowed to be destroyed, or the division comes in because we're playing up our differences instead of recognizing that we're in this together.
That was a big thing with she hinted at it when she talked about how the latter X started to see Martin Luther King different, and how mainstream tried to paint them two as opposites, but at a latter date, they kind of start to play hand in hand to say, hey, we might have different viewpoints about this thing, but we have to come together in this collective struggle if we're going to make this thing work and get to the common goal that we want for a people of color in the end. So that was helpful. And I kind of thought about that book we read in Dr. Thomas's class, the Crossing the Crescent between Malcolm and Martin, and kind of how that kind of paints that picture of them opposite, but then by the end, it paints them in this picture of coming together to some common goal when they finally have that meeting in the latter part of their life, or in the early latter part of their life, because neither one of them lived to the full potential of their lifespan. But she really was helpful in that aspect of painting them to, like, they're not at odds as people try to paint them. They come to this consensus of, we might be on different ends of the pole, but we're all fighting for common goals. So we have to put these differences aside and fight for the common goal of the colored people.
Yeah, because she was saying that while we were trying to sort through our differences, that they were fortifying the oppressive structures in the way that they did, while we were sitting there, looking at those differences. And it's very easy to do. Just for an example, there's 4 of us on here right now. So we meet and say, hey, what's up? Well, Quick, you light skin, Walter light skin, Nick dark, Brian's brown. That could be something that separates us. It could be, well, we 3 went to HBC, Walter went to a PWI. That could separate us. Our denominations could separate us. Our fraternities, Walter, could separate us. There's so many things that could really cause a schism but together, when we come together, it's like, that doesn't matter. We have a goal. We have a goal in which we want to, that we're trying to achieve. And we realize that those differences gives us different perspectives. And also the differences help us with our own individual blind spots. And so it's like having, when I used to eat that big bowl of cereal on Saturday, I used to watch the Super Friends. For an example, it was the one character that I wanted to be, but when he did come on, the Black Falcon, but everybody had their own individual things, and it was seen as if they had something happen in the water, then they would say, hey, it's Aquaman turn, or whatever. But it all pretty much came together. So
at the end of that same sentence, and I think you all have summed it up well. He says, not he, but Ms. Lorde says, Black people are not some standardly digestible quantity. And that's what I was trying to get at with Martin's question or comment, was that she puts this emphasis on number, or here even that it might be on maybe not so much number, but on the amount of effort that one puts into being authentic. Because throughout the rest of the essay, it's about how authentic can you be in the face of adversity. Are you willing to be yourself when the oppressor comes? Because that becomes very important, because do you want to stay in the proletariat, or do you want to become bourgeoisie? You know, and that is something that everybody has to struggle with. You know, I listened to Dr. Melvin Sampson. She preached this message called "Exile or Compromise," and one of her main tenets was, you know, at what point do you self-exile or do you compromise in order to become a part of the establishment so that you can progress to become a supervisor like one of us just became? So, it's just one of those things that happens. At what point do you lose your authenticity? And we've often talked about this, you know, sometime here in our conversations, you know, what is the price of authenticity that you're willing to give up in order to make it in this white supremacist world?
Well, that question you asked is so helpful in the text that we've read so far, because they all had to wrestle with that issue. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that was at the forefront of writing the words of their hearts and their minds. Like, do I really publish this because this is authentically who I am? And there's a risk that if I publish this, like, this is going to make who I am and what's available to me look very different. W.E.B. Du Bois in his time, Cornel West, Angela Davis, Audre Lorde, all of them in their respective times, the literature that they wrote was very, like, this is very problematic to the status quo in having people of, especially having people of color or people of the struggle to read this, because when you read it, this is empowering. And so this becomes problematic to really realizing or keeping to who you authentically are. And so this shows that you can be authentic, but you got to be authentic and really be intentional. I mean, that's my word of 2021, like, to be intentional about what you do and what you're going to do, because I mean, it is what it is. Once it's out there, it's out there.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm slightly different, because earlier in the book, one of the other essays, Miss Lorde is clear, Dr. Lorde is clear that she's not afraid. She's not fearful anymore. There, you know, and she says, your fear is not gonna save you. Right. So it's not a question of authenticity. Because in fact, not being authentic, trying to conform, again, letting go of your differences, is going to kill you. Mm-hmm. That's what's going to kill you. You know, it's going to make it even easier for the oppressor or whatever. But it's going to kill you. Right. So I hear your question, but I don't think that's a question for this author, for Dr. Lorde. I don't think that's a problem for her. That's no.
But I agree with you, Walter. But she's not asking it for herself. She's asking it of her readers.
Right. Well, and I don't even know if she's again. I think she's saying, listen, if you want this thing, if you want to live, this is what you got to do. I don't think it's a question. That's what I'm saying. Like she said, and I don't know which essay it was. There's one essay she says, your fear is not going to save you.
Right. You're right. She does say that.
It's not going to do you a bit of good. So you might as well recognize you're going to catch it. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. You're going to catch it. So you might as well be yourself. You might as well live out your differences. Because you're going to catch it either way.
Right, which goes back to the committed part. I don't care if you're committed or not. It's coming. I mean, it doesn't matter. Like, you can be fearful, you can be scared. Fearful, you can be brave. I mean, it's something that's just still coming. Like, you can't escape it. So,
because I tell you what, this point, to kind of piggyback off your point here, I think this is near the end of the close to the end, when she says militancy is no longer about guns at high noon, but it means actively working for change, and sometimes at the absence of surety of change.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And she talked about things not being immediate. Like, you got to know that, you know, we wanted to just change immediate. Like, I mean, we want to see difference, but every little seed that's planted, like what we're doing now, you know, 20, 25, 30 years from now, maybe when people see the change that we're hoping to see now. But those little struggles and those little wins or those battles that they still need to take place. Right. And you know, I mean that's the part where we have to move ourselves out and say, you know, like Dr. King and Malcolm, they knew their time was coming, but neither one of them ran from death. I mean, they didn't run. I mean, they knew it was inevitable. They had the lot had been cast. And so, because of their work, and even remember King said in one of his speeches that he could see someone black being president. Do y'all recall him saying that? But there's a video clip of him saying that he could see, and he used the word Negro because that's what I could see a Negro president, you know, in the next 20, 30 years, I think is how. I wish I could see it, but, and so it came to fruition, some of the work that he did that he never saw.
But I think we also, even with the waiting, it wasn't a wait as in this wait as in black folk have to wait because as King talks about in the letter from the Birmingham jail, where we've always waited. That has been the ultimate excuse all the time. You know, this is not the proper time to ask for civil rights or to ask for to be made equal citizens. So I don't think it's that type of wait, because I understand what you're saying, because she does make points about, you know, that it is this particular way of seeding into the future. But where is that line in the sand, or that redefining of what does it mean to wait in a unjust system?
Well, I think James Baldwin in that clip so eloquently said it. Yeah. How much time do you want? I waited for my mama time. I waited for my sister's time, my uncle's time. Like, so what do you want? I'm sitting on the sidelines waiting. How much time do I have to sit and wait? Like, at some point, we have to say time is up.
Okay. When you say that, then Nick, right, what do you do?
Yeah, see.
Well, there lies the question. I mean, and it's the struggle. I mean, we can sit here until we blue in the face and say the things of what do we do, but I think until we have a consensus, as she say, across the board, I mean, we're gonna continue to go for certain things and be turned down because there's no common consensus.
But consensus will never happen because that goes back to the previous point. We will never have consensus across the board because we're not all the same, monolithic. We're not all, I'm trying to use her term here, we're not all standardly, digestibly, quantifiable, uniquely one and the same.
I highlighted that and I said, okay, you say this, then what do we do?
Can I maybe? Well,
go ahead.
The question I have, well, and again, I may be slightly off again because I'm, you know, I think differently. I think one of the things that's happening is we're falling into the trap that history sets a lot of times. We look at what happened and we tend to think, for whatever reason, that the people who were involved knew the outcome. They didn't have any idea. You know, when the 60s, when the 50s began, in the 60s, the Montgomery bus boycott, now this stuff began. They didn't have any idea how any of this was going to turn out. Yeah. This was not like, okay, we do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do, you know. And even with Dr. King and Malcolm X, you know, Malcolm says, yeah, I'm doing these things. I'm being who I am. So they have to talk to you. But they still didn't know how that was going to turn out. So what I'm saying is that we continue. You're saying wait, but we don't wait. We're really working while we're waiting, or whatever you want to call it. We're doing the things that we feel like are going to be helpful, that we feel like are going to make a change. We don't know how those things are going to turn out. And when people look, as Mark said, 20, 25, 30 years from now, and they look back and they say, well, they had this plan and they did this and that. And the fact of the matter is, we're just doing it. I mean, you know what? And to go back to the book, Dr. Lorde makes this point. Many of the gains that are even now being dismantled. So many of the gains that were made. This is not a reason for despair, nor for rejection of the importance of those years. I used to hear it all the time when I was in the classroom. I still hear it occasionally from young folks. They did all that for nothing because things ain't changed. And I'm like,
yeah,
shut your mouth. Yes, some things are not where they need to be, but things have definitely changed. But even if nothing changed, she goes on, but we must face with clarity and insight the lessons to be learned from the oversimplification of any struggle for self-awareness and liberation, or we will not rally the force we need to face the multi-dimensional threats to our survival. And she says in the 80s, I say in the whatever we're in now, the 20s, the 2020s, if we don't recognize some of the lessons that we can carry over from the 60s and the 70s, 80s, from the ancestors, period, and continue to apply those in new and different ways, then we're done. We're sunk. And if we ever begin to believe the lie that all this stuff happened and nothing's changed, then we're going to be sunk into despair. But, so what I'm hearing, like I said, where I started, is we just got to understand, not fall into the trap of history of thinking, well, they were just so great, or, and they were great people. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying.
Right.
But they didn't know what they were doing.
Right.
It never been done before. They didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah. And so, Walter, just to your point, I mean, I happen to know everybody's background here. If, our parents or the people that raised us would ever see that we would all would have gone to a predominantly white seminary and carry this message of radical inclusion and make demands upon a seminary that they do things differently. Those times when they went to work every day, when they were tired to work long hours, to sacrifice for us to be where we are, not knowing what, especially in my case, now I'm like, I don't know if this nigga gonna be in jail or is he gonna do something great? I don't know, but they consistently, and as a result, I am the first person in my family to have never picked cotton. So every little thing that you do every day is work. And it may not feel like work in progress, but my great grandfather would have never imagined himself sitting on a conversation like this when he was working and doing the things he did to try to make sure we have food on our table. So all those things matter, and we can't diminish that, because that's when you fall in despair, because he didn't reap what I'm reaping, right? So we're hoping that what we're planting, the reaping will be done later. But that's not, as frustrated as we are, we're not gonna quit, because that will mean we lost, like we've given up. Of course, we would love tomorrow, wake up tomorrow, and there's no more racism or sexism, and all these are just gone. But that's not realistic. And I think she makes that clear. Where she says immediate change, she said, therefore will cause immediate change to be replaced by deeper and more meaningful and lasting change. So that's the learning from, okay, well, we see if you do it Malcolm way, right, then it's going to cost your life. Are you willing to do that? Then you said, nah, let me find a different way. Well, if you do it Martin's way, yeah, you'll make some friends, but they're not going to love you until 40 years down the road. And they only embrace you because they were scared of Malcolm. So you take all that information, as a blueprint, and say, hey, we gotta still work. Yeah.
I think
So
this
we
was
don't get despair.
also helpful. She says, for me, when she said, because I've been in that place of that question we asked, like, what do we do? And it's just that constant plugging at the bit and continually just doing what we see fit that needs to be done. She says, revolution is not a one-time event.
Right.
It's a becoming, always
Right.
building for the smallest opportunity to make a genuine change in established, outgrown responses. For instance, it is learning to address each other's difference with respect.
Yeah.
And just that piece of, it's not a one-time event. We get in this rut of thinking this ending of racism, this ending of the struggle, it's just this one-time thing that's just gonna fall out of the air like a meteor.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be like, all right, at once we're all equal. Like, that's just not how it's gonna
And
play.
Nick,
It's gonna be a
and Nick,
constant, continual
and
thing.
Nick, we talked about, and we was joking about people retiring early, right? What would they do? If racism ended today, what would y'all do tomorrow? I'm just curious. What would you do? Like, Brian, you have to take all your stuff down. You don't need to put that up no more.
No, I wouldn't take it all down. Because you notice, I always say this. When we finish, I say, survive, cultivate joy. Because it's a reason why I put it like that. And this is something that Dr. Ray taught me, when we had an independent study class, and he says, if you're constantly focused on racism and never move to joy, then you will be in despair. And he says there will come a time, because Dr. Ray is a staunch Calvinist. So everything is, we win in the eschaton. He's very clear about that. We win in the eschaton. So what happens if we don't think like that? So it's always survive, cultivate joy. But then I always go back and say, resist and stay dope. Because we always have to understand that just because we defeated it once, notice it says revolution, don't mean it can't come back.
Right. Or a different way, kind of like the virus, the COVID. They call it different variations are,
variants.
And it has, and that's good, because even with the racial, in terms of race and some of the other ism, they have kind of changed and come in different ways of presenting itself, more sophisticated, kind of like the virus, it learns from what has been done to fight against it, the vaccination, and it begins to adapt as well.
Right,
so
right.
that's why you never arrive at
but think about this one thing that Miss Lorde says. She says survival is not a theory. Look, I was at the point I said, yo, that was it right there. I gave her a hand clap and I said, that is it. Because I was listening to this conversation last night between Kesey Lehman and Regina Bradley, and he asked her a question about theorizing. And she said, Black folks been theorizing, even though those who didn't go to college. And I thought, and it got my attention because I never heard anybody talk about it like that. She says, when you on your porch and your homeboy, your homegirl comes over there and says, like, look, man, don't go up the street. The police up there. So you might need to go back down the road here to get where you going. She was saying that is theory, because it's teaching you, it gave us ideas, because theory is about another way of navigating through life for our own protection. And I never comprehended it like that, because to me, theory was always academic. And when we fail to understand that all this stuff that we have been learning, will learn, and continue continue to learn, we must always take it out of the academic setting and bring it back to the hood and bring it back to the community and bring it back to our family, because everybody ain't going up in the halls of academia. You know, that's why it's so important that when we learned Black liberation theology and we took it back out. Everybody didn't accept it. Everybody is not going to accept it, but they heard it. And eventually they start theorizing with it. It makes them a little uncomfortable, but they can't say they didn't hear it. You know what I mean? And so that when Miss Lorde said survival is not theory, it's not that she wasn't saying it doesn't have theoretical applications. She said it read more like not only,
right.
You know what I mean? Not only. It's like we have to look at this thing and say, how does this help us get to tomorrow? Survive, cultivate joy. Because guess what? If by chance racism ends tomorrow, that means, guess what? We celebrate. Because guess what? That's what we've been fighting for.
Right. but we know, but even with that, we know that it wouldn't be that easy. I mean, in the sense of a person that's abused, because the abuser has stopped, that doesn't mean that tomorrow the scars and stuff, because I mean, I remember I had a friend that his parents obviously abused him, and I saw one day when he was standing by his dad, and his dad went to open the refrigerator, and he ducked because he had gotten so many beatings that it still would be there, even though his dad said, "Hey, I'm never going to touch you again." So it's just, it still worked even afterwards, because you can easily, like you said, slip right back into it. Like, okay, it's coming a more sophisticated way this time, even more sophistication with it.
Yeah.
But I did want to say something about. I want to challenge you on the fact that you will go back to the hood to with the theory. I think my theory was created in the hood. It may have been sharpened in academia, but I had gotten that theory early on from the very things that I've talked about earlier. My grandfather was the first philosopher that that taught me. I mean, he understood things in a way that perhaps some of the other people didn't say it, but he would always say things like, "There's no second education in the kicking of a mule, and there's no education in the second kicking of a mule." And so things like that, those are theories that you say, okay, what does he mean by that? Or he would say, be careful, man. They don't care about the wagon. I mean, they don't care about the mule. They just say load the wagon, and when the mule dies, they go get another mule. So those types of things that he planted in me early, that I learned, and when I got to school, I began to sharpen that. And yeah, I'd come back and maybe bring some of the stuff that sharpened, but it was in me early.
And I think that speaks to what we were talking about earlier about the authenticity.
Yeah.
Because the problem comes if you got that, and then when you went to the academy and you say, "Oh, I didn't really get that."
Yeah.
And as I was looking at this thing last night, and I was sharing with you earlier, the thing that got my attention was that these were two academics, scholars, but when you heard the conversation, you thought it was two cats on the back porch down in Jackson, Mississippi, and nobody else was around, because they were presenting it with some beautiful, colorful language, a lot of it. And I mean, we talking about things that you would say that you like, these folks scholars, but it was just a beautiful conversation between two friends, jumping in and out of hip hop slang with high scholastic vocabulary that the average person may not know. But the way that this type of interplay that was happening, because they were very clear about their authenticity in any space. Like when you see me, I'm representing Jackson, Mississippi. When you see me, I'm representing Albany, Georgia. And I'm doing it with all my Southern slang and my Southern drawl, whatever you may see. I don't have to kind of change my dialect because I'm in this particular space because you don't like a Southern dialect. And this is kind of what Miss Lorde is kind of bringing to the space about authenticity and what happens, or the need for authenticity at all times, and how it provides a level of revolutionary content and revolutionary bravado everywhere we go. And because, let's be clear, we've all seen it. That's not always welcome. You know, I thought about this just today. You know, we were all at the Lutheran Seminary when Brother Clem was murdered at Mother Emanuel. Not one plaque was put up for that brother. You know, they had a little prayer vigil, but there was never a plaque that was placed there. As many times as we made the suggestion and say, hey, we need something to say that this brother was here, he was a student here. We need something in remembrance. Never was it done.
Well, I know why that probably was.
I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of reasons why. And I mean, we won't you know, castigate. But what my point is, when you have certain levels of authenticity, especially in predominantly white spaces, and you bring that authenticity to the space, it's not always warranted. It's not going to be loved. It's not going to be catered to. And you have to make a conscious decision of whether I'm going to give up that authenticity and that me being who I am. Because you know how Miss Lorde talks about when she's writing, when she's becoming a teacher, because she had to think about it. Here I am, this Black woman who's lesbian, who has Black children, but I'm also married to a white woman. So there's a way that I have to come into a space, and all these things are in play at all times. Because if you start, she first starts out, she makes this one statement that I kept reading. And she says, I was this Black woman who was raising two children and a husband. Now I said, what kind of person says they're raising two children and a husband? You know, she was very clear about that. Like, I'm raising three people in this house because in her diagnosis and analysis, that's what she was doing. She was raising the husband just as well. And she had to get rid of the dead weight to move on because that's not authentically who she was. She was in love with him. You know, she had proclivities and energies, as she would later call it, toward a woman. So it's all these things coming into play of being authentic, but how does that play into her vocation or damage her growth and moving up the academic ladder? Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of it probably, as we were saying earlier, a lot of things shape that experience probably shaped a lot of her perspectives and on how she sees things. Because when you talk about you know, those things that you've outgrown some things because you've outgrown being inauthentic. You get to a point where, you know what, I can't perpetrate this anymore. That I got to be real in terms of sharing my experiences, and I got to be real. You just get to a point where, you know, you just get tired, like, you know, like
look, that's what she says. Yeah. It's becoming always vigilant for the smaller opportunities, and Nick read this earlier. Smallest opportunity to make a genuine change in established, outgrown responses.
Yeah.
You know, you get, for instance, the learning to address each other's differences with respect. Yeah. You know, you get tired of telling people, you calling me boy is going to get your teeth knocked out. Yeah. You know, that gets old. Yeah. That gets real old. And you know, at what point, you know, in the last couple of chapters, she talks about women, you know, having this power to, when they recognize who they are, you know, whether that's being a Black woman or being lesbian, you know, they are then oppressed. Now, think about that. Once you recognize your authenticity, you then become oppressed because folk begin to become fearful of you because you know who you are.
Yeah.
That's a dangerous thing for a person to know who they are. People, and guess what? And the problem is, folk can't oppress you when you know who you are, because now you begin to protest.
Yeah. Yeah, and shake off labels and all that stuff, like
exactly,
like whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
once you get to that place of mental freedom, as J. Edgar Hoover says, you become a threat to the American society.
Yeah.
Because then once you get there, you can teach others how to get there.
Right.
Yeah.
And we live in a society where that type of liberation is frowned upon and not warranted. They want, the system kind of begs for the proletariat, the working class. It needs the working class.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it needs the working class.
And I started thinking about the chapter we read about the two who will not dismantle the master's house. When you get to that mental freedom, you start to build your own tools. We don't need your tools. We're going to figure out our own tools to do what we need to do to get to where we want to go.
Oh, you're going to get us in trouble.
We're gonna use, and I mean, just to be honest, our creativity as a people, we don't need what you got. We'll figure out our own way to get beyond the gates that you're trying to hold us in.
Now, let me, Dr. John Henry Clark says this. He says, you don't deserve to lead a nation if you can't figure out how to make a shoestring. Now that sound, it's funny, yeah. But he's making a point, because he's saying it's not the big things that we may have a problem with. It's the simplest things, because you don't have any shoestrings and you try to run in the midst of a battle.
Yeah.
He says, because understand, if you talk about nation building, you have to take into consideration everything that comes with building a nation. All this stuff has to be thought about, because guess what? Now you don't have that production in place, that infrastructure in place. When you're talking about nation building, now you have to come up with all that stuff. You have to come up with the seeds to bid for your crops and things like that. So what happens when all that stuff is not in place and we're talking about building a nation? There are no structures for no banks and no reciprocity of crime. Now, because we can deal with that in a particular way, but there's so many things that has to come into play when we're thinking about that. And I think Miss Lorde in this, I think Walter maybe answered this better than me. The 60s provided a interesting clip because of so many things that happened in the 60s. Now she's only talking about some, Malcolm X and what Brother Malcolm did. But you think about, the back end of the Harlem Renaissance and what that provided to the arts and all that stuff. A lot of major events happened in the 60s.
Well, she says that. She says the raw energy of Black determination released in the 60s power change in Black awareness and self-concepts and expectations.
Yeah.
And when I read that, I was like, wow, like that says so much of the continued power that we've established and kind of is playing out in what we're seeing in these issues that we're having in today's time and culture. I think that's still that energy that was placed and put in place in the 60s.
Yeah. But
I'll say this.
I think that energy was put in place.
That way.
Say again.
I said I don't think it's realized or put in that way, but knowing the trajectory of what happened in the 60s and how things started to move, I think with respect, you have to play back to what was put in place in the 60s.
Oh, I was going a different way. I'm saying, no, I'm not even starting in the 60s. I'm starting in 1619. That's when the energy began.
Now, you playing with a different deck of cards. You unfair.
Yeah, that's the big joker.
That's a historian's deck of cards. I don't have that.
Walter pulled Trump early.
I don't have that deck of cards to play with. You playing unfair. But continue.
Well, but I'm saying
I'm willing to learn.
that again. That's one of the traps of history. But I'm saying that's the traps of history. Those are the things. The way history is taught in our schools and the way we understand history is the names and dates. So 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. We don't really think about all the implications. We're beginning to start to think deeply, and people are beginning to question, why are we celebrating this person who said, with 50 soldiers, I could get these folks to do whatever I want them to do, because they're not well armed and blah. So, and I don't want to go through all that. But what I'm saying is, in 1619 is when the civil rights movement began.
That's real. That's real. That is real.
Hey,
that's when it began.
Nick.
He just slammed the
big
on the table and it's spinning.
And it won't stop spinning. And as Miss Lloyd said, it ain't stopped. It didn't stop because what happened, and I don't want to get too deep in this because I could talk for about an hour, but go back and look at the presidential election of 1964. We keep hearing over and over, people keep talking about how it was the Republican Party that freed the enslaved people, and the Democrats were actually the ones who would the part of the KKK and all that. You've probably heard that a million times online with folks trying to justify saying that the Republican Party isn't racist and blah, blah, blah. But go back to the presidential election of 1964 and look at, because there's a podcast, actually, I can't remember the name of it, but I'll try to remember to find it and mention next week. But you can listen to it, and it talks about how up until 1964, there were conservative Republicans and liberal Republicans. There were conservative Democrats and liberal Democrats. And the whole point of the party convention was to get the planks of the platform to fit together, to get enough conservatives on board, enough liberals on board, on both parties, and then the moderates would tie it together. 1964 is when the conservative Democrats said, to heck with this stuff about some black civil rights, and they walked out of the Democratic convention, and they walked into the Republican Party. And that is and then you see, that was the beginning, 1964 now. Now think about, and in 64, there was a young fella named Ronald Reagan.
Is that where the Dixiecrats came from?
Say again?
Dixiecrats, is that where that came from?
Yeah, it was either that. It may have been it may have been 60 with the Democrats.
With our boy Strom Thurmond.
It may have been 60 with the Dixiecrats.
Okay,
but 64 is when you have Dixiecrats was something. This is the Democrat. These are Democrats going to the Republican Party, not running as a third party.
Gotcha.
Not the Dixiecrats, not running as a third, but going to the Republican Party, becoming part of them. and the conservatives the Republicans taking a turn, all the liberal Republicans, they lose their power. They don't have, and that's when 64 is when Republicans become conservative. That's when it happens. So again, and then you fast forward to when she's talking about in the 80s, they have honed that over those 16 years. They've honed that message so that Ronald Reagan, who's nobody governor, or no nothing in 64, not even a governor, but just a politician out of California. By then, he's got the strength of this conservative Republican Party behind him to win the presidential election. This is what I mean. This stuff, that's what she's saying. Don't get caught up in you can't see some change happening. You're gonna see some change happen, and then there's gonna be some backlash. It's gonna happen. You know, we had all these things happening in the 60s, and people are seeing them happening, and they begin to plot. It kind of what Brian was saying, like we begin to recognize who we are and what we can do. Oh, we can actually make these kind of changes. Well, that's when the oppression is going to hit hard. That's when they're going to come back even harder, because now you're starting to actually you're getting like civil rights bills passed and stuff like that. You know, housing, fair housing, and all these kind of things are coming through. Oh no, this can't stand. And in the 80s, we get the backlash.
Well, yeah, I mean,
don't get me started.
The
I'm gonna stop right there.
First African American president. I mean, you see the backlash in that.
Well,
stop right there.
Well. The lessons of the 60s.
I'm done. The big joke is still spinning in the middle of the table.
It's spinning. But I know all the people that were born in the 60s are special people. I do know that.
Well, that doesn't mean the fact that folk who were born in 70s.
You can't accept different. See, Walter, he can't accept different. I just said we're special. I didn't say anything.
He can't.
I didn't say anything. I said except that doesn't demean. Okay. I put emphasis on it. It doesn't. I didn't say you were.
Why would it? I use a positive statement and you turn it.
I did too. I use a positive statement too. You say it wasn't in what you said. It was the demeanor. All that. See all that.
Smile.
Yeah, I know some people who got popped with a smile on their face. Can't walk away too.
Don't get him started, Martin. Don't get him started.
Yo, well, we about to hit the end of this. Appreciate y'all tuning in.
We got? Is it just one more?
Yeah, we got 2 more chapters, and then we're moving into
Toni Morrison.
We haven't made the decision yet. I can't reach the other book over here, but
hey man, but I'm gonna say one more time. This Miss Lorde, this Audre Lorde, man, she ain't nothing to be played with, man.
Hey, she's a bad mother. Shut your mouth.
She's a bad Bama Jamma. Shut your mouth.
I know my wife gets tired of me talking about her because she looks okay. I get it. She's I get it, Martin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're like, no, I don't think you do. I don't think you understand. You gotta read.
But let me tell y'all this. Whoever compiled this, they did a good job, because it's almost every week we begin to see the climax. Like okay, if I would have put this one in the second chapter, you may not have read the whole book, because whoever compiled them kind of put it like a good album. Like, it flowed in a particular way where all the particular essays, lectures, or stories fit, and kind of it wasn't disjointed in your reading, and it kind of built you up so it wouldn't punch you in the face too much, because the next 2 stories, except maybe the last one, is kind of, because I think the last one is more of a kind of this kind of something. I don't know if it's an essay as much as it is just her kind of reminiscing about her time in Grenada.
Well, you know what? I saw where they were showing of Hip Hop Evolution how, what was the other side of the record called with De La Soul? They were saying that it was he said he was looking at his father's records. it was the other side, you know. But they let you become a fan of hers by putting the good stuff up front. And so once you became a fan, you'll listen to the B side of the album too. So that's a good way, good analogy of how you present it.
Yeah, she brings the funk. She brings the funk.
Because even if she misses a chapter on this point, I mean, I'm a fan. It doesn't even matter, you know. So
yeah, she does. Miss Lorde is a banger.
Yeah,
she's a banger. She's climbing up the charts with a bullet.
Yeah.
Hey, well, appreciate you all tuning in. Remember, survive, cultivate joy and resist, and stay dope. And that is. We'll see you next week. Peace.
Oh, double Jack.